For any business, whether it's a huge factory or just a small workshop, there's a real risk of, well, ending up like this broken chair, metaphorically speaking. And it all boils down to one massive challenge: truly, deeply understanding the cost behind what you sell.
It seems like such a simple question, right? How much does it really cost to make that thing you sell or to deliver that service you provide? But let me tell you, getting the answer to this one right is one of the most critical things any business will ever do. And the stakes? They couldn't be higher. Seriously, this is one of the biggest mistakes a business can possibly make. Because if you get your costs wrong, your price is going to be wrong. And if the price is wrong, the whole company could be at risk. To find the answer, we have to dive into the world of accounting. Now, I know what you're thinking. Accounting is for tax collectors and investors, right? Well, that's financial accounting. Today, we're talking about its cooler, more strategic sibling, managerial accounting. This is all about giving managers inside the business the info they need to make much, much smarter decisions.
Okay, to make this all real, let's follow a story. Let's meet Litsema Furnishers. They're making a brand new dining room suite called the Jupiter Star Set. And we're going to go right behind their factory doors to figure out its true cost.
All right, the first and most obvious cost you run into is direct materials. This is basically the stuff you can literally see and touch in the finished product. For Letsema's Jupiter Star Set, the main ingredient is yellow wood, and that costs them a solid R600 for every single set they make. Next up, you need someone to actually turn all that wood into furniture. That's your direct labor. People often call it touch labor because these are the folks physically working on the product, putting it all together. For Letsema, that labor costs R400 for each Jupiter Star set. So, we've got the wood, we've got the wages. We're done, right? Not so fast. What about the glue that holds the chair together? Or the salary of the factory supervisor? What about the electricity that powers the saws? These are the essential, but kind of hidden, factory costs. And all these hidden costs, they get grouped together under one name: manufacturing overheads. I mean, think about it. You can't build a chair without a supervisor watching over things. That's indirect labor. And you can't do it without glue and polish. Those are indirect materials. They're absolutely essential, but you can't really trace a few cents worth of glue to one specific chair, can you? So here's the big picture of all the costs happening inside that factory. It all boils down to two main types. You've got your direct costs, like materials and labor, that are super easy to trace. And then you have all those indirect costs, which we just bundled together into manufacturing overheads. You add all of that up, and you finally get your total product cost. But wait, a product's journey doesn't just stop when it rolls off the assembly line. To find the true total cost, we have to look at all the expenses that happen outside the factory walls. The costs of actually selling the thing and just running the business. These non-manufacturing costs are called period costs, and they usually fall into two big buckets. First, you've got marketing and selling costs, everything you do to get the product into a customer's hands. And second, you have administrative costs, which is pretty much the cost of keeping the lights on and managing the whole company. And just to bring this back to our example, Letsema Furnaces pays its sales team a commission. So for every single Jupiter Star set they manage to sell, the company pays out R500 Rand. That is a perfect example of a selling cost. It has nothing to do with making the product, but it's an absolutely critical cost of doing business. Okay, so far, we've been sorting costs into buckets based on what they're for. But here's where things get really interesting and really powerful for managers. We're going to look at costs in a totally new way, by how they behave when your business gets super busy or when things quiet down. And it really just comes down to this. Some costs are fixed and some are variable. A fixed cost, like your factory rent, stays the same in total, whether you make one dining set or 1,000 of them. But a variable cost, like your raw materials, goes up in total with every single new set you produce. You can really see this come to life on a graph. See that flat yellow line? That's your total fixed cost. It doesn't budge no matter how much you produce. But look at that green line, your variable costs. It just climbs and climbs with every new unit. Understanding this relationship, well, it's absolutely crucial for smart financial planning. Let's look at another quick example. A company called Zondi Manufacturers pays $14,500 a month in rent. Back in December, they were cranking out over 3,000 ashtrays, and the rent was $14,500. The very next month, they only made about $1,400, and guess what?
the rent was still $14,500. That right there is a fixed cost in action.
Now let's flip that. The materials to make just one ashtray cost Zondi R580. This cost per unit is always the same, but the total variable cost, that changes. If they make 1,000 ashtrays, the total material cost is $5,800. If they make 2,000, it jumps to $11,600. See the difference? The total changes, but the per unit cost stays constant.
Okay, we've sorted all the costs, we understand how they behave. Now it's time for the moment of truth. Let's put all these pieces together for Letsma Furnishers and finally calculate the true total cost of their brand new product line. The process is actually pretty straightforward. First, we'll add up all the production costs. That's our materials, labor, and overheads. Second, we'll tally up all the non-production costs, the selling and admin stuff. And finally, you guessed it, we just add those two big totals together. And here it is, the grand total. For 1 month, to produce and sell 200 Jupiter Star sets, the total production costs come to are $219,100. The non-production costs add up to our $123,500, which gives us a total monthly cost of our $342,600. That is the number they need to know. This brings us right back to where we started, to that big warning we heard at the beginning. Getting that final number wrong can have huge, huge consequences, which is exactly why this whole process is so incredibly important. Because at the end of the day, knowing your true cost isn't just some boring accounting exercise. It's the bedrock. It's the foundation for every good business decision. It tells you how to set your prices, how to plan your marketing, what your production goal should be, everything. It empowers you to make decisions with real confidence. And that leaves us with one last big question. So, Letsma Furnishers now knows their total cost. The next challenge, and maybe it's the most important one of all, is deciding on a price. How do you turn that cost into a healthy profit? Well, that's a story for another day.